A story begins with Yuwon, a young primary school student who's picked up by her father, Youngjae, after school. At school, the other kids tease Yuwon about her father, calling him a widower after she mentions the term. Curious, Youngjae asks her where she learned the word, only to discover that it was their neighbour Madame Jeka who taught her. As they walk home, Jungha asks her father for a friend, someone to play with since he's so busy with work. That's when a new family moves into the neighbourhood, and Jungha is thrilled to learn that they have a young boy named Sanha who could be the perfect playmate. But when Jungha cracks a joke about their apartment being on the third floor, the boy's mother, Jungha, doesn't find it funny, and tension fills the air. Later that night, Yonghae argues with her husband Dae-wook about the joke. She accuses him of making light of their family's tragedy, the loss of their daughter, Sawe. Their argument escalates, and their neighbours, disturbed by the noise, call the cops. To everyone's surprise, the police officers are sympathetic when they realise the sergeant, Sawe, is dealing with such personal pain. The sergeant says, that night Sanha sits alone on the stairs, and Ju-won and her father invite him to watch TV. Sanha refuses, citing that he needs to go back inside. Inside, Dae-wook tries to console his son, explaining that his mother's anger isn't aimed at him, but at her grief. The next day, Madam talks to Youngjae and reveals that Sanha was the only one home when his sister passed away, and his mother blames him for it. Youngjae grows increasingly concerned for the boy. Later, when Sanha returns from school, he cleans up the beer bottles left behind by his mother and prepares some ramen. But something's not right. He's eating it uncooked on the stairs when Yuwon notices him, and she offers him a meal at her house, but Sanha refuses. Jungja, worried about the boy, prepares a meal for him, but despite Ju-won's best efforts to coax him in, Sanha won't come inside. The following day, a woman named Seyon arrives in the neighbourhood with her son Hedun. She's introduced to Madam, and a somewhat awkward interaction happens, where Youngja accidentally spills water on Seyon and her son. Inside, Madam reveals to Youngwon that she's trying to set up her father with Seyon. But Youngja isn't thrilled at the idea of having a stepmother. She feels strongly about keeping her family as it is, and expresses her displeasure. Things get more complicated when Ju-won notices the local bullies picking on Sanha, and she steps in to defend him. Hae-jun joins the fight, and soon the three kids are caught and taken back to the neighbourhood. Jungja asks Ju-won to apologise to the bully, but Ju-won insists the bully should apologise to Sanha. After the conflict, Hae-jun grows fond of Jungja, and he invites Sanha and Ju-won to lunch at their house. The kids bond over the meal, and things begin to take a positive turn. As time goes on, the kids start to bond further, and Sanha and Ju-won's friendship grows. But there's still tension at home. Sanha's mother is struggling with grief, and the family's dynamics are shifting. Jungja even takes it upon himself to care for Hae-jun when Seo-hyun faces some personal issues. Sanha continues to face challenges as he deals with the complicated emotions surrounding his sister's death and his mother's struggles. Meanwhile, Ju-won's life is also changing. She gets upset when Hae-jun calls Jungjae dad, but eventually they all begin to form a new kind of family. The story fast-forwards to a few months later, and things have started to settle into a new routine. Sanha and Ju-won grow closer, and the three kids, Ju-won, Sanha and Hae-jun, begin to bond as siblings. As the years go by, the family dynamic becomes more and more defined, with Jungja, Ju-won, Hae-jun, Sanha and Dae-wook sharing a warm breakfast together. Ju-won suggesting that they should sign an adoption contract, symbolising their desire to become a true family. Sanha jokes that it would make him her uncle, but Ju-won is determined to make sure they all share the same last name, creating a bond that goes beyond just blood. Ju-won, Hae-jun and Sanha ride the bus to school, and as they chat, Ju-won reveals how ever since middle school, girls used to give her gifts for her two brothers. They always wondered if they were siblings because of their different last names. Ju-won is determined to change that. She wants to make sure they all have the same last name to avoid bullying at school. Hae-jun urges Ju-won to fight back, but Sanha advises her to take the matter to the teacher instead of causing trouble. Haejun, undeterred, insists Ju-won should ignore Sunha's advice and teach the girls a lesson. At school, two girls accuse Ju-won of trying to keep them away from Sunha and Haejun because she likes them. In a moment of frustration, Ju-won follows Haejun's advice, dragging one of the girls to the school pond and jumping in, leaving the girl behind. The other students sympathize with Ju-won when the bully calls her crazy. Ju-won's classmate, Dal, tells Haechun about the incident, and soon both Haechun and Sunha rush to help. Sunha, ever the protector, scares off the bullies and takes Ju-won and Haechun with him. After school, the trio heads home in the rain. They decide to run instead of waiting at the bus stop. On their way to a convenience store, elderly neighbors question Haejun about his mother's return. Ju-won stands up for him, telling the woman to stop treating them like unfortunate children. Later that night, Ju-won brings up the idea of adoption again, mentioning how the neighbors constantly make harsh comments about them. Meanwhile, Sunha avoids his maternal grandmother's call, and Dae-wook, frustrated by the situation, heads out to speak with her. Despite Ju-won's efforts to cheer him up, Sunha isolates himself, leaving the dinner table to retreat to his apartment. Wan's husband Burde and agrees to help improve the relationship. Jongjae, concerned about Dae-wook's ongoing tensions with his ex-mother-in-law, encourages Dae-wook to move on. The two friends bicker, while Jo-won and Haejun try to force Sunha to eat. After some playful teasing, Sunha finally accepts their efforts and agrees to eat. Later, Jo-won teases Sunha, joking about how she never calls him oppa and asking him to pay for it. The next day, Sunha talks to his counselor about enrolling in a nearby college to stay close to his family. The teacher suggests a medical college, but Sunha insists that it doesn't matter where he studies, as long as he's there for his family. Dal shares with Ju-won that the girls have been spreading rumors about her, calling her crazy. Instead of being upset, Ju-won finds humor in it, offering to introduce Dal to Sunha. However, when Ju-won sees Sunha entering the music room with his classmate Hwae-ju, she feels hurt, believing that they are dating. Inside the music room, Sunha and Hwae-ju talk, and Sunha insists they should not be alone together, fearing what others might think. Hwae-ju brings up how Sunha hasn't applied to a Seoul university, leading to a heated exchange between them. Ju-won, upset by the sight of them together, refuses to speak to Sunha on their way home, accusing him of hiding the truth about his relationship with Hwae-ju. Haejun, meanwhile, is caught up in a confrontation at school with a man who snaps photos of him. The man runs off, leaving behind his camera, and Haejun wonders if his mother is involved. That night, Haejun's aunt Yi-hyun brings gifts, and Madam causes trouble at the restaurant, complaining about Young-jae's responsibility in taking care of Haejun. Haejun, upset by the challenges, recalls how Young-jae has always been there for him despite the challenges. At dinner, Sunha realizes that Ju-won's upset behavior stems from their argument. He apologizes, revealing that he isn't dating Hwae-ju, and promises to be honest with her and Haejun moving forward. Later, they all sit down together for a meal, and things return to normal. Haejun faces more drama when his ex-girlfriend Hwae-ju tries to get back together with him. He rejects her, stating that he doesn't want to hurt Ju-won. Dal, however, tells Ju-won the truth about Haejun's past relationship with Hwae-ju. Haejun then attempts to befriend Ju-won, leading to a heated confrontation between the two girls. The argument escalates when Hwae-ju tries to paint Ju-won as a bully, causing the school to turn against Ju-won. However, Sunha steps in to defend her, threatening to expose Hwae-ju's secrets. Later, as the family enjoys dinner on the rooftop, Hwae-ju buys a cake to make up for not standing up for Ju-won at school. Meanwhile, Haejun learns the truth about the camera he found and chases after a woman he assumes is his mother. Dal sees him, and Haejun tries to smooth things over by offering to take her out for a meal. Back at the restaurant, Ju-won and Sunha share a quiet moment over noodles, but Ju-won can't help but bring up her frustrations with Jongja. The next day, a man arrives at school in a luxury car, claiming to be Haejun's father, leaving everyone stunned. CEO Yang Dong-gu, the mysterious rich man behind Global Biz partner, but plot twist, he doesn't even know who Haejun is. Apparently, So-yeon kept this massive secret from him. Naturally, Haejun is full of questions, but Dong-gu quickly makes an excuse and leaves, telling Haejun to meet him later at his hotel. Meanwhile, Ju-won is having her own drama. She's getting tons of love letters from girls at school, all for Haejun and San-ha. One girl admits that she doesn't even care if San-ha reads her letter. She just wants to vent her feelings. But Ju-won's not exactly happy about her own report card, ranking 23rd out of 25. She hides her grades when Park Dal shows up with the report cards and eventually discovers a letter that reveals Ju-won has a secret admirer. Meanwhile, Dal overhears a conversation between Haejun and Suk-hoon about Haejun's mysterious biological father. On the bus ride home, Sun-ha gets mad at Jung-ga for her poor grades and scolds her. Jung-ga tries to defend herself, but Sun-ha points out that Haejun's grades aren't much better, except he gets extra credits for his sports. This sparks a conversation with Jung-ja at the restaurant, where Jung-ga confides about the love letter she received. Jung-ja, however, urges her to think about her future and keep her options open. Later, Young-jae finds Haejun outside the restaurant, and as they're talking, Madam mentions how Haejun has started to resemble Young-jae after all these years. Young-jae then takes Haejun home, but after dinner, Sang-ha meets with Haejun on the rooftop. Haejun finally opens up about his biological father's sudden reappearance, questioning why his mother, Sohyun, abandoned him. This prompts Sun-ha to suggest that they should confirm if Dong-gu is really his father, even recommending a paternity test. It's a light-hearted moment when Sun-ha jokes about Dong-gu potentially needing Haejun for an organ transplant, and Haejun actually chuckles at the idea. The next day, Ju-won and Dal try to figure out who wrote that love letter to her, but they end up trailing a bunch of guys with no luck. Ju-won is shocked to find out that Haejun isn't at basketball practice, which only adds to the growing tension between them. Meanwhile, Sang-ha takes Haechun to Lee-hyun's office to get answers about Dong-gu. Lee-hyun reveals that Dong-gu had stolen money from Sang-ha when she was pregnant with Haechun and had left her to raise him on her own. This revelation stuns Haechun, and Sang-ha suggests they go grab a drink to process everything. Meanwhile, Ju-won is left feeling frustrated, especially after San-ha announces that they're leaving for a trip without her. The tension is palpable, as Dal arrives at Ju-won's house to spend the holiday with her. But things escalate when Ju-won shows Dal Haejun's messy room, violating his privacy. Then, the moment everyone has been waiting for, San-ha and Haechun meet with Dong-gu at a luxury hotel. Haechun is furious and demands answers. Why did Dong-gu leave when Sohyun was pregnant, and why is he back now? Dong-gu's response is chilling. He admits that he doesn't have any biological children of his own and that his wife's family is excluding him from their wealth. His offer? He wants Haechun to come to the USA to play basketball professionally, all for his own selfish gain. Naturally, Haejun is disgusted and storms off. Later, San-ha and Haejun sit by the beach, and Haejun vents about how awful Dong-gu is. San-ha reminds him that it's not only Dong-gu to blame. Auntie Yoon also kept the secret from him for so long. In a shocking twist, Dong-gu shows up at Young-jae's restaurant and introduces himself as Haejun's father. He offers a huge sum of money as compensation for raising Haejun, but Young-jae refuses to take it, infuriating Dong-gu even more. Later, Ju-won and Dal show up and realize it's Dong-gu who's been talking to Young-jae. The kids rush inside and find out that Dong-gu has already left. San-ha takes Ju-won home, leaving Jung-ja and Haejun to talk. Jung-ja tells Haejun that his biological father wants to take him away. He breaks down in the process, telling Haejun to stay behind to finish high school. Haejun, in turn, reveals his deep fear of being abandoned again, something he's carried since his mother left. Jung-ja consoles him, deeply moved by Haejun's emotional turmoil. Ju-won, however, offers some comfort, suggesting that Haejun can occasionally meet his biological father, but shouldn't leave their family. Haejun is touched by her words, and is reassured that he has a place with them. Back at Dong-go's hotel, he runs into Young-hee, Haejun's mother, who's in town to introduce her daughter to San-ha, adding another layer to the complicated family dynamics. Young-ja and Dae-wook having a serious discussion over drinks, debating how to handle the situation with Haejun. Meanwhile, Ju-won is still processing everything and casually mentions the secret love letter she received, but with the growing family drama, It seems like everything else is taking a backseat. Sanha receives a call from his mother but doesn't answer. He spends the whole night crying, and the next morning he wakes up with swollen eyes. At the breakfast table he lies, saying he was studying all night. Hae-chun isn't making things easier for Ju-won. On the bus, he tries to talk her out of dating the person who wrote her that love letter. He even asks Sanha for his opinion, but Sanha stays silent, clearly deep in thought. At school, Dal finally cracks the mystery of the love letter and reveals to Ju-won that Junho was the one who wrote it. And guess what? Junho ends up running into him, and he asks her out on a date. After a bit of hesitation, she agrees, while Dal, Hae-jun, and Sanha watch from a distance. Dal and Hae-jun are thrilled to see Ju-won with a handsome guy, but Sanha, well, he looks less than pleased. On their date, Ju-won quickly realizes that Junho is a bit of a picky eater and kind of opinionated. The night takes a turn when Junho drops Ju-won off at home and makes a comment about how cheerful she is, despite being raised by a single parent. That comment hits Ju-won hard, and she reacts by telling him she has 2 older brothers and 2 dads in her family. She's upset and asks him never to contact her again. Back at home, Ju-won reflects on how people always pity her and the boys, without truly understanding how close they've been as a family for years. At dinner, Hae-jun praises Junho, but Sanha interrupts, asking him to hold off on making judgments. When Ju-won walks in and reveals that she's done with Junho, Hae-jun is a bit surprised, but doesn't push further. The next day, Dal is confused about Ju-won's decision to end things with Junho after just one date. Junho later apologizes and asks Ju-won to give him another chance. Ju-won asks him to keep their conversation at the bus stop a secret, but Dal is dying to know what happened. Ju-won, however, refuses to share the details. Meanwhile, Jung-hee, Sanhe's mother, shows up outside the school, ready to confront her son. She runs into Sanhe and Ju-won, and she pulls Sanhe aside to have a private conversation. Jung-hee tells him that she's aware she hasn't been in touch with him for the last decade, and she's here to bring her daughter So-hui to visit him. This catches Sanhe off guard and leaves him more agitated. At the restaurant, Ju-won tries to get Hae-jun involved to help Sanha, but Hae-jun refuses to interfere. Inside, Chung-hee says she's willing to forgive Sanha, but he's left confused by her words. Flashback to Hae-jun walking home alone, still struggling with his own family issues, particularly his mother's abandonment. Sanha, however, remains emotionless when he tells Jung-hee to stop calling him and leaves her to handle her own affairs. Yoon tries to check on him, but he remains silent during their walk back home. Things take a dark turn when Sanha, in his deep pain, walks into traffic, and Junha tries to calm her down. She's shaken and breaks down, but Sanha tries to calm her down, eventually taking her to get something to eat. Meanwhile, Dae-wook runs into Jung-hee while patrolling. During their conversation, Jung-hee mentions her husband and daughter, triggering Dae-wook. She tells him she's here to support her husband and wants to take Sanha to Seoul for college applications. Dae-wook is furious and storms off, refusing to let her take Sanha away. Later, Jung-hee consults a lawyer, worried about a potential legal battle with Dong-gu, who could claim Hae-jun if things get complicated. At dinner that night, Hae-jun gets frustrated when Ju-won brings up Sanha's mother showing up unannounced. Sanha tries to defuse the situation, but an argument breaks out between him and Hae-jun. Sanha reveals the painful truth that his mother still blames him for his sister's death, and he warns Hae-jun not to be jealous of Jae-hee. Hae-jun tries to argue back, but Sanha insists that the world is full of toxic families, using Dong-gu as an example. Sanha and Ju-won share an ice cream together, but Hae-jun refuses to join them. They talk about how he's been holding on to the hope that his mother will return one day. Dae-wook reassures Sanha that Jae-hee won't bother him anymore, but later Ju-won tries to convince Hae-jun to make up with Sanha by offering him ice cream. The next day, Dong-gu's assistant suggests that he should try harder to embrace Hae-jun so he can truly understand his worth. Meanwhile, Sanha confronts Junho at school, warning him to stay away from Ju-won. Junho, unaware of the full extent of Ju-won's family situation, makes another insensitive remark, which finally helps Sanha understand why Juvon was so upset after their date. Tensions continue to rise when Haejun has a physical altercation with a teammate. Sanha steps in and the two of them sit down with Junho to settle things, causing a bit of a school-wide stir. Junho rushes to the scene, defending Junho and scolding Haejun for grabbing Junho by the collar. After some heated words, Haejun makes it clear to Junho that he needs to stay away from Junho, no matter what. On their way home, Sanha talks to Jowon about the cruel comments she's been hearing and urges her to ignore them. Just as things seem like they might calm down, Chae-hee shows up at Jonghae's restaurant with her daughter, So-hee. Chae-hee asks So-hee to call Sanha Oppa, but So-hee gets scared by Sanha's reaction. Sanha gets aggressive with his mother, and Jowon takes the little girl outside to avoid further confrontation. Inside, Sanha tells his mother to leave him alone and warns her not to mess with his life, but when Haejun shows up outside, he's shocked by the way Sanha reacts to his mother's return. He tries to get through to him, but Sanha, frustrated and hurt, tells Haejun to stay out of his family matters, Sanha making a harsh statement, reminding both of them that they're just boys abandoned by their mothers. Both boys are at each other's throats, and Daewoo has had enough, calling them out for their poor table manners. Things get so heated that both boys leave the table without finishing their meals, and of course, Yoongcha scolds Daewoo for letting it escalate. A week later, Jowon's sharing with Daal how stressful things have been at home due to the fight between the boys. Daal, trying to keep the peace, suggests that Jowon give them some time to resolve things. But Jowon has a plan. She's determined to get Sanha and Haejun to reconcile by Haejun's birthday. She also notes that Haejun's aunt always visits during his birthday, so it's the perfect opportunity for everyone to come together. Enter Junho, who checks in on Jowon and asks her out on a date. This sparks an idea in Jowon's mind. She decides to invite both Sanha and Haejun on a bike date. Of course, they both refuse at first, but eventually they both fall right into Jowon's trap. She also invites Daal along to help ease the tension. On the day of the bike ride, Daal lies to her mum, telling her she's going to study at her academy, but she ends up joining the bike date with the boys. To Jowon's surprise, half the school seems to have joined the ride, and things get even more awkward when Junho tries to join Jowon on the bike. Daal arrives late, and while waiting for her, things get more intense between Sanha and Haejun. They end up fighting more, which leaves Jowon feeling upset. But then, something happens that completely changes the course of the day. Jowon notices Daal being harassed by a group of boys. Despite being exhausted from the bike ride, she rushes to her aid, only to pass out from exhaustion. The boys, seeing Jowon in distress, run to get her some water, but this only causes Sanha and Haejun to lose it. They think the boys are responsible for Jowon's condition, and they go after them, resulting in a huge fight. Fast forward to the police station, where things get even messier. Daewoo rushes over after getting a call about the fight. Sanha, feeling guilty, apologizes to the boys, but the situation escalates, and Daewoo demands severe punishment for them. Thankfully, the boys they fought with decide to let them off easy. Meanwhile, Jowon tries to explain the situation, but her efforts don't seem to help much. Back home, Daal's mother scolds her for lying about her whereabouts, and Daal, wanting to protect herself, lies about studying with Sanha. The boys also pretend to make up in front of Jowon, but we can see their unresolved tension. Sanha and Haejun are still on edge, and they continue their act in front of her. The next day at school, rumours start spreading about Daal having feelings for Haejun, which doesn't sit well with her. After some tension between Daal and Jowon, Daal decides to tell the friends that she's not interested in Haejun to squash the rumours once and for all. Later, Jowon and Sanha go shopping for Haejun's birthday present, and they end up buying him some basketball shoes. While at the mall, they get a funny moment where the cashier assumes they're a couple, and Jowon plays along to get a discount. But things take a turn when Sanha's mother, Jung-hee, and his little sister Cho-hee show up at the mall. So he gets scared when she sees Sanha, and things get awkward quickly. Sanha tries to check on So-hee, but Jung-hee makes a remark that only adds fuel to the fire. Jowon, fed up with her, defends Sanha, saying good things happen when he's involved. It's a moment of growth for Ju-won and a real turning point in her relationship with Sun-ha. Fast forward to Hae-jun's birthday dinner, where tensions between his aunt Yoo-hyun and Young-ja are high. Yoo-hyun suggests that Hae-jun go live with his biological dad in the USA, which upsets Young-ja, leading to a heart-wrenching scene. Hae-jun, trying to smooth things over, cuts his birthday cake, and the mood is soured even further when Yoo-hyun makes a comment about Hae-jun owing everything to Young-ja. It's a tough moment for everyone, especially Hae-jun. Later that evening, Yoo-hyun apologizes to Hae-jun, but tensions are still high. As things cool down, Hae-jun, Sun-ha and Ju-won meet on the rooftop, and finally, Hae-jun and Sun-ha truly make up. It's an emotional reconciliation that signals the end of their feud. A surprise visit from Seo-hin at the restaurant, setting the stage for even more drama to come. She shows up to give him money for raising Hae-jun all these years, but Young-ja is taken aback. He insists that Si-shun meet Hae-jun since he's been waiting for her for the past 10 years. But Si-shun, not wanting to give Hae-jun false hope, says that she can't take him with her and asks that they keep the money, handing back the envelope, except for the money he lent her. Si-shun cancels her ride back to Taiwan, says he wants her to go, and asks that they keep the money, handing back the envelope, except for the money he lent her. This leaves So-yeon confused and frustrated. Meanwhile, Hae-jun notices someone who looks like his mother leaving in a taxi, but he doesn't think much of it. The trio, Sun-ha, Hae-jun and Ju-won, are headed to the rooftop when they receive a call from Young-hee, informing them that Sun-ha is missing. So the group rushes to find Sun-ha, who, it turns out, stole her mother's purse and took a cab to see Sun-ha. They find her at a restaurant in a neighbouring village. After retrieving So-hee, they go to the noodle shop, and Sun-ha scolds her for leaving home without telling her mother. When Jung-hee arrives, she blames Sun-ha for what So-hee did, causing an argument. Dae-wook stands up for Sun-ha, but Jung-hee insists that they're a family, no matter what, and tells Sun-ha to beg for forgiveness. This sends Sun-ha into a panic as memories of his sister's death resurface. He storms off, exhausted, and goes to bed without dinner. Later that night, Hae-jun and Ju-won discuss what happened. Hae-jun finally understands what Sun-ha meant when he called his family toxic, and it hits him hard. Over the next week, Hae-jun and Ju-won take turns leaving breakfast for Sun-ha, who continues to skip meals. Hae-jun finally talks to Sun-ha at the bus stop, telling him that skipping meals won't solve their problems. He reminds Sun-ha that while he has no parents to turn to, he can talk to Dae-wook. It's a heartfelt moment of understanding between the two. The next day, Dal joins Ji-won in delivering breakfast to Sun-ha's classroom. She asks Ji-won to talk to Sun-ha about helping calm her mother down. Sun-ha smiles when he sees the note Ji-won left for him and adds it to the collection of notes she's written him over the weeks. That night, Sun-ha comes home late in the rain, and Ju-won tries calling him. When he doesn't answer, she goes out to look for him and finds him sick and exhausted. Despite his protests, Ju-won convinces him to come home for dinner. At the table, Hae-jun points out that Ju-won spent an hour in the rain looking for Sun-ha. It's a small but crucial moment that breaks Sun-ha down, and he finally eats. Later, the three kids meet on the rooftop, where Sun-ha opens up about missing his late sister. The trio bond over their shared grief, and Sun-ha ends up passing out from a fever. The group looks after him, taking turns to check on him throughout the night. The next morning, Sun-ha wakes up feeling better, and Dae-wook takes him to visit Sojong's tombstone. They talk about how Young-hee's words have affected Sun-ha over the years, and Dae-wook reassures him that Sojong's death wasn't his fault. As everything seems to settle, the kids get ready for school. Yi-hyun sends Hae-jun a picture of his newborn daughter, asking him to visit soon. But things get awkward when Ju-won tells the boys that Dal's mother has invited them to an expensive meal. Sun-ha, ever the realist, points out that everything in the world is transactional, and Dal's mother probably wants something in return. At the lunch, things get uncomfortable when Mrs. Park puts Dal down in front of her friends, calling her dumb for not knowing how to order. Sun-ha tries to help Dal by encouraging her to practice more in math, but the tension builds as Mrs. Park continues to criticize her. Dal finally breaks down in tears and asks her mother to stop insulting her. Ju-won notices Dal's tears and is visibly upset for her friend. After the meal, the kids head to the beach, where Hae-jun remarks that Dal has a mean mother. However, Sanha steps in, telling Hae-jun to be more understanding. At the beach, Sanha gives Dal some encouragement, handing her his notes and telling her she has the instinct to become a great lawyer. He also reminds her to think of her mother as a human being, which helps Dal feel a little better. Meanwhile, Hae-jun tells Ju-won that Dal might have feelings for Sanha, which makes Ju-won uncomfortable. Just as things are getting tense, Hae-jun receives a call from Lee-hyun about his niece, and Dal leaves for her academy. This leaves Sanha and Ju-won walking home together, but things take another turn at the hospital. At the hospital, the nurse accidentally reveals that Soo-hyun is there to meet Lee-hyun, and Hae-jun is shocked to learn that his mother has returned, but hasn't made any attempt to see him. It's a heartbreaking moment that leaves Hae-jun feeling abandoned. That night, Young-ja talks to Daewoo about the envelope of cash So-hyun gave him, and he wonders how to break the news to Hae-jun. When Hae-jun notices the envelope, he breaks down, upset that he can't repay Young-ja for everything, now that So-hyun has taken care of the debt. A lighter note, with Ju-won jokingly holding Sanha's hand while walking along the ledge. She teases him about being dense for not realizing Dal likes him. Sanha, of course, responds with a playful comment, but before we know it, Ju-won slips and ends up falling into Sanha's arms. The two share a moment of silence before heading home in an awkward atmosphere. At home, Sanha can't hide his emotions when he sees Jeon-ja washing his school uniform by hand. Overcome with guilt, he joins his father and tells him to take care of his health. Hae-jun, still processing his own feelings, brings up that his mother has returned, and he was planning to pay back Jeon-ja anyway. But Young-jae tells him it's not about the money, and Hae-jun breaks down in bed, unable to hold it in. The next day, Young-ja is at the noodle shop calculating his finances when Daewoo expresses relief that Dong-hee and So-hee are heading to Seoul, out of Sanha's life for a while. The conversation shifts to Hae-jun's birth father Dong-gu, who has been MIA for a while. Meanwhile, Dong-gu shows up at a basketball game, proudly watching Hae-jun as he performs well on the court. He promises to return for the inter-school basketball match next week. Later that night, Ju-won tries to talk to Sanha, but he's still upset about their earlier awkward moment. He kicks her out of his room, claiming he's too busy with CSAT prep. Ju-won starts to wonder why Sanha's been acting off, and Hae-jun brushes it off, saying it's just the stress of exams. Ju-won then gets an idea and enlists Dal's help to make talismans for Hae-jun and Sanha, hoping it will bring them some luck during their exams. She prepares a care basket for the boys and wishes them well. On the day of the CSATs, Hae-jun is clearly feeling the pressure, answering every question the same, just hoping to pass. Both boys are stressed out, but their focus is on getting through it. Later, Dae-wook and Young-cha head out for drinks, leaving the kids to celebrate. Ju-won invites Dal over, hoping to get her to spend more time with Hae-jun, who's still oblivious to her feelings. At dinner, Ju-won accidentally burns her hand while grilling meat, and Sanha freaks out, dragging her downstairs to treat the burn. Ju-won expresses how happy she is that Hae-jun and Dal are getting time together, and she wonders how Hae-jun could be so oblivious to Dal's feelings. Meanwhile, on the rooftop, Hae-jun opens up to Dal about how his mother returned to pay Young-ja back. He admits he's embarrassed about the time she caught him looking for her. Dal gets emotional, and Hae-jun, moved by her reaction, reassures her that he won't tell Sanha about her crush on him. Later, as Sanha and Dal walk to the bus stop, Sanha asks Dal why she hasn't confessed her feelings for Hae-jun. Dal admits she's afraid it might ruin their friendship, something Sanha understands all too well, as he struggles with his own feelings for Ju-won. Sanha gets an unexpected call from a familiar number, his mother's phone number. Thinking it's her, he angrily answers, only to find it's So-hee. This leads to an argument with Jung-hee, who demands that Sanha apply to a university in Seoul. Sanha refuses, and when Young-hee claims that he'd only care for her if she were dying, Sanha is even more upset. The next day, Sanha's teacher praises him for his high CSAT scores, encouraging him to apply to a prestigious university, but Sanha refuses to leave his small town. Similarly, Haejun's coach tells him that he has the potential to attend a top-tier university based on his skills, but Haejun too refuses to go far from home. Later, the students gather at the basketball court for Haejun's inter-school match against a rival team. Junho saves a seat for Juwon and Dal, but Sanha sits next to Juwon instead. The game ends with Haejun's team winning, but things take a turn when Donggu shows up at the noodle shop. He tells Youngjae that he's been selfish for holding Haejun back and shows him brochures for basketball programs in the USA, implying that Haejun should be playing professionally instead of staying in their small town. Daewoo gets upset with Donggu for calling Youngjae selfish, especially after everything he's done for Haejun. Donggu storms out, but not before running into Haejun. Haejun defends Youngjae, but Donggu isn't having it. He pressures Haejun to come to the States with him, but Haejun refuses, even threatening his birth father not to cause any harm to Youngjae's restaurant. That night, Haejun reflects on his father's threat. Sanha and Juwon talk about it on their way home, with Juwon confident that Haejun won't leave the family. Meanwhile, at home, Junja apologizes for not being there for Haejun's matches and reassures him that he doesn't need to go to college far away. They have a heartfelt moment, and Haejun promises not to worry. A major twist, Sanha, Haejun and Juwon are on the rooftop when Sanha gets a call from the hospital. The shocking news is that Jung-hee was in a car accident and her second husband didn't survive. Daewoo and Sanha arrive at the hospital in Seoul after hearing the news about Young-hee's accident. They're met by Young-hee's brother, who informs them that she's undergoing surgery but has a weak heart, and tragically her husband and So-hee's father has passed away in the crash. It's a lot for Sanha to process, but the good news comes the next morning when the doctor tells them that the surgery was a success and Young-hee is out of danger. Sanha is relieved and texts Haechung to let him know. He heads to the ICU to see his mum, but the sight of her condition deeply saddens him. As the story progresses, we see Sanha deciding to stay in Seoul for a while to look after So-hee, but Daewoo pulls him aside, warning him not to take on a responsibility that isn't his. However, Sanha, feeling the weight of the situation, insists that he needs to stay. After all, So-hee has no one else now. Back home, Dooja tells Youngja that Sanha will stay in Seoul for a few days, and it's clear he's confused by Sanha's decision to care for Young-hee, especially after how badly she's treated him in the past. Meanwhile, Dooja wants to struggling with Sanha's absence and worries about how he's handling everything on his own. The next morning, Jungja can't help but miss Sanha. She tells him all about her day and, even though it's only been one day since he left, she's already feeling his absence. That evening, she asks Youngja and Daewoo to take her to Seoul to visit him, but both of them refuse, claiming they have work. Jungja, determined to see him, goes on her own and ends up at the hospital. However, things take an awkward turn when So-hee gets jealous of Juwon texting Sanha and asks him to buy her a drink. Juwon spots them, but when So-hee calls Sanha Oppa, it sends Juwon into a spiral of emotions. She realizes that no matter how close she feels to Sanha, they're not actually family, and she leaves without seeing him. Meanwhile, Haejun is busy searching for part-time jobs when he runs into Dal. He learns that Juwon lied about hanging out with Dal and he gets frustrated with her for not conserving her phone battery. Haejun scolds Juwon for her behavior when she returns, showing his concern for her, and the tension between them builds. Later, at the noodle shop, Youngja, despite his health issues, is determined to keep the shop open late. Madam tells Haejun that his father is obsessed with making money, even at the cost of his own health. Haejun helps his dad clean up and massages his shoulders, trying to ease his pain, but the stress is clearly taking its toll on everyone. Then we see a heartbreaking moment where Sanha visits his mum, who's just woken up, but is devastated upon hearing the news of her husband's death. She breaks down, cursing her fate, and Sanha tries to comfort her, but nothing seems to help. To make matters worse, the doctor informs Sanha that his mum has no movement in her legs and won't be able to walk again. It's a lot for him to take in. Later, his uncle suggests that Sanha should stay in Seoul to look after his mum and So-hee, but Sanha is torn. He's worried about leaving Ju-won and everything back home. Back at home, things are equally tense. Ju-won is waiting for San-ha's return, while Jung-ja makes his favorite meal, trying to keep things normal. But when San-ha arrives, he and Ju-won share a sweet moment when she helps him with his bag. However, before they can settle down, Hae-jun takes San-ha to the rooftop for a conversation. Hae-jun tells San-ha that he's made up his mind to go to the USA with his birth father, Dong-gu. San-ha is upset and argues with Hae-jun, insisting that he needs to stay home to be with his mum. He worries about what Ju-won will think when she finds out that both he and Hae-jun are leaving her. The argument intensifies as San-ha accuses Hae-jun of being ungrateful to Jun-ja, saying he's abandoning him for his rich father. Just as their fight escalates, Ju-won arrives at the rooftop and overhears the tension. A heart-wrenching note with Ju-won learning that both San-ha and Hae-jun are planning to leave her behind. The emotional weight of the situation is crushing. Naturally, she's upset and skips breakfast the following day. At school, she acknowledges for the first time that the three of them aren't really a family and leaves on her own. San-ha learns about Ju-won's visit to him while he was in the hospital and hurries to meet her at a cafe. He promises to return soon, while Hae-jun says a final goodbye to Park Dal. The next day, the two leave without Ju-won seeing them off, and she later cries in front of her father, regretting her decision. 10 years pass, and their video calls turn into text messages, until finally, Hae-jun disappears entirely. San-ha apologizes each year for not being able to make it to Ju-won's birthday. Now, Ju-won owns a bakery, and San-ha has become a doctor. Meanwhile, Dal warns Ju-won about a strange figure lurking around her bakery. She ends up in a scuffle with a hooded stranger who refuses to reveal his identity, until Ju-won's father and San-ha's father both end up at the police station. At the same time, San-ha arrives at the station after discovering Ju-won's bakery in disarray. The two boys are back, but Ju-won is less than thrilled and reiterates that they're not truly family. Hae-jun and San-ha return to their house, feeling nostalgic upon seeing that their rooms have been left just as they were. While they have dinner together, San-ha finally announces that he and Hae-jun are home for good. They won't be leaving anymore. Naturally, the two fathers are overjoyed. Later, she returns to her apartment, which she shares with Dal, and fills her in about Hae-jun and San-ha's unexpected arrival. The next day, while leaving, the two friends bump into their new neighbors, who turn out to be Hae-jun and San-ha. San-ha quickly makes Hae-jun the scapegoat, leaving him to explain the situation to Ju-won. It's clear that the two intentionally rented the unit next to hers. Ju-won tells San-ha to stop by her bakery so they can talk. While Hae-jun is at the bakery, she hands him her card to buy new sneakers, since he's shabbily dressed. San-ha starts his new job at a nearby hospital, where we see Lee Jun-ho and Do Hui-ju, both doctors, working alongside him. Meanwhile, everyone assumes Hae-jun is unemployed, prompting the dads to check their savings account to help the kids. Hae-jun, however, has been searching for a location for Young-jae's new restaurant in the city. Later, San-ha walks Ji-won home, wishes her a happy birthday, and rushes back to the hospital. Meanwhile, we learn that San-ha's mother and sister think he's simply on vacation. On Ju-won's birthday, the family waits for her at breakfast, and just when it seems she won't show, Ju-won arrives and quietly takes a seat, hinting she might be softening. After breakfast, she scolds Hae-jun for cutting contact with them for over 5 years. Unable to answer, Hae-jun is finally defended by San-ha, who reveals that Hae-jun had hurt his leg so severely that the doctor said he might never walk again. Hae-jun kept this from everyone, and the news brings Jung-ja to tears, as he blames himself for letting Hae-jun go. The 3 kids leave to give the dad some space. Later, Ju-won questions San-ha about his absence over the years, and we learn that his mother wouldn't let him leave, though San-ha lies, saying he was just busy. Meanwhile, Hae-jun and Jung-cha reconcile. In the evening, Ju-won, Dal, and the 2 boys plan to meet to celebrate Ju-won's birthday, but unexpectedly everyone turns up after Hae-jun accidentally slips about the celebration. Once everyone leaves, San-ha doesn't make it on time and leaves Ju-won's gift on her doorknob. The next day, Ju-won thanks San-ha for the present but declines his invitation to meet. Later, Lee Jun-ho mentions Ji-won's plans for a date that evening, making Sun-ha uneasy. Meanwhile, Dal manages to get Haejun to buy her hangover soup. That evening, San-ha shows up at the bakery but can't reach Ju-won. Fortunately, she returns to retrieve her phone and, after 10 years, San-ha finally confesses his feelings for her. Ju-won tries to feign ignorance but is ultimately so distracted by the event that she completely forgets about her date and goes back home instead. Park Dal figures out that it's not a sibling issue with her and San-ha anymore. The next day, when she meets San-ha in the elevator, she swears to keep his confession a secret. On the other hand, Haejun figures that he needs a family relations certificate to buy a property for Jongjae. Now, while still bothered by San-ha's confession, Jongjae acts nonchalant when they gather for dinner at her house. There, Haejun asks Jongjae to marry him, to everybody else's comic disgust, because it's the only way for him to make his relationship with Jongjae legal. Later, Ju-won tells San-ha that she'll forget about his confession, but he pushes for her to reconsider, asking her to give him a chance all over again, without their past history. While going back, San-ha helps Haejun realize that he doesn't need a legal status for their relationship. Meanwhile, San-ha's mother keeps calling him. Unable to get through, she calls his father after Haejun and San-ha have left, letting him know that she'd only sent San-ha on a month-long vacation and is expecting him back soon. The next day at Ju-won's bakery, Ju-won catches Haejun's friend, helping him visualize whether Haejun is romantically interested in Ju-won, which ends badly, with Ju-won hilariously punishing Haejun by making him clean her bakery's windows. On the other hand, San-ha clarifies to the dads that he's back for good and his mother is just being her overbearing self. While he's leaving, he asks Jongjae to visit the hospital for a checkup the next day. Jongjae and Ju-won arrive there, and while Jongjae completes his checkup, San-ha treats Ju-won's wrist pain, which is when Ju-won feels butterflies in her stomach. The next day, Haejun meets with his aunt, and the topic of his mother is brought up yet again, as she hasn't contacted Haejun at all in the last 10 years. While coming back, Haejun follows someone who looks like his mother, but bumps into Dal again. On the other hand, Jongjae actually bumps into Haejun's mother while he's on his way to get his prescription from the hospital in Busan. She tells him that she'd killed someone, which is why she cannot meet with Haejun, and now runs a shop in Busan. On the other end, frustrated with her blind dates, she asks Haejun to pretend to be her boyfriend for a day. In the meantime, Ju-won and San-ha meet, and Ju-won tells him that they couldn't be anything more than siblings. As they're leaving, it begins to rain, and they rush to take cover in a tunnel, where San-ha kisses her, and Ju-won doesn't refuse it.